Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled The Assault Against the Word of Truth, Part 8. The three challenges you must succeed to be chosen to have everlasting life. The podcast objectives are reveal the final major player in this controversy, analyze the path to merging your will with the Father's will, analyze the link between distractions and sins of omission, and reveal what happens when we lose confidence in the spiritual process. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcast or videos for the first time. We trust you are led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. Where there is no election. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome back to our Word from a Watchman series. In the most recent podcast, we analyzed the third of the four major players in the controversy between divine scripture and the text. Enter the decoders of the text. Now, as you learned, these ministers of Elohim are guardians of the truth. Along these lines, we have been empowered with the spirit of discernment, a key feature of the sword of the Ruach, which we have been given to defend the word of Elohim. Now, seeing how our world is filled to the brim with false prophets and false Hebrews, defending the word of truth has become a full-time job. What is more, it is a crucial vocation due to the final players in this controversy. Enter the chosen elect, i.e., the sheep within the spiritual fold of Elohim. Along these lines, the decoders of the text are commissioned to interpret divine scripture so that all who have been called can come to the knowledge of Elohim. Here lies the inflection, which I will offer as a revelation. Consider this. The chosen elect represent a body of true believers who are being set apart, but they are not currently set apart. In effect, they have been called, but they must make their calling and election sure by achieving perfection in the Ruach of Elohim. This is why those who will be chosen are referred to as the chosen elect. 4, we become members of the kingdom of Elohim by election. And where there is no election, one cannot be chosen, which is why the master is declaring, many are called, but few are chosen. Now, these things being what they surely are, the question of the hour is this: why will a few be chosen when so many have been called? The answer is sure, and it not only reveals the difficulty involved in the election process, but it also is the key to understanding the fourth and final major players in this controversy. And these are the topics for today's podcast. Let's get started. Succeeding every challenge in your election. Now, seeing as there is much to say about these matters, we once again have a great deal of material that we must cover, and thus, per usual, I will be quick, but not in a hurry. Now, first things first, we must analyze the primary reasons why the election process is so difficult. Understanding that failure to succeed, this process is the primary reason why many are called, but only a few will be chosen. Let's get to work. Now, we should start by analyzing the order of the Torah, i.e., the perfection of three, which reveals that there are three primary facets of all spiritual things. And as you know, they are the fundamental, the focal, and the critical degrees. Let's start with the fundamental. To wit, the starting point of every challenge involved in the election process. Enter the requirements. Along these lines, the requirements upon our election are very detailed and prescriptive. Plainly speaking, there's a lot involved and not a lot of leeway as it pertains to execution. Remember, the will of Elohim is fixed, which is why it is centered on the decreed will and not the permissive. For that which he permits is established upon that which he has fixed. Facts. Now, fundamentally speaking, there are many challenges when it comes to the requirements upon our election, and they all evolve from one glaring fact, which I will offer as a revelation. Get this: the requirements upon our election require a greater spiritual and physical effort than anyone desires to put forth. And this is true for even the most ardent believers, for no one can know the requirements until they know the requirements. And trust me, it is human nature for us to assume that a task is easier than what it is. The same way, we also assume it will not take as long as it will actually take. For the matters of the Ruach are a fixed spiritual science, and we are fools every time we try to estimate. Now, here lies the difficulty in fulfilling the requirements upon our election. To wit, these requirements are recorded in the Father's will. And what have we learned about his will and our will? Vis-a-vis, they are never congruent in the beginning. This is why the prime objective of knowledge and wisdom is to merge our will with the Father's will. It is to bridge each gap so that they are congruent. For every gap represents a deviation of his will and a huge red flag as it pertains to our election. Now, that said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: understanding that every deviation of the Father's will is a disqualifier as it pertains to our election. How do we merge our will with His will such that there are no deviations? The answer is sure. You must fulfill every requirement. And this is something you can only do if you are being led by the set apart Spirit and have ascended to the plane of knowledge. Now, you can see the relationship between the degrees of knowledge and the requirements upon our election in the table below. It begins with consideration, which causes us to meditate on all the requirements on our election. This leads to understanding, which causes us to learn all the requirements on our election. And last but not least, this leads to acceptance, which causes us to be delighted in every requirement upon our election. That said, please feel free to pause the video and observe the table, which reveals how you can establish a firm foundation for succeeding every challenge in the election process. When you fail to commit. Now, this brings us to the focal reason why our election into the eternal kingdom of Elohim is so difficult. And we touched on this in Monday's podcast. Vis-a-vis, the enemy is constantly attacking us with a wide range of distractions. As you learned, the deadliest distractions are not temptations to commit an illicit act of sin. Quite the contrary. The deadliest distractions are those things which prevent you from fulfilling the requirements upon your election. Here lies the complexity and the danger. Vis-a-vis, the deadliest distractions don't appear to be deadly on the surface. And this is one of the many reasons why we must operate in the Ruach of discernment. To wit, the Ruach of discernment has the power to expose all the distractions in your life as impediments to your election. And yet, that exposition will have no value if you don't do something about it. Now, here lies the inflection and a key revelation that reveals how and why Yahuwah is allowing the enemy to employ a vast array of distractions to help him in his evaluation of the wheat and the tares in this nation. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. In many cases, distractions are not contrary to the individual who is being distracted. Plainly speaking, the distraction is aligned with the individual's desire. It is a matter they want to pursue. Ergo, they will not perceive it as a distraction. And since they are intent on pursuing it, they will falsely assume that the distraction is a factor of Yahuwah's permissive will. For seeing as it is not an illicit act of sin, they falsely presume it is not a sin. Now, there are countless problems with this false presumption, and they all have to do with a model of sin we touched on very early in this exposition of lawlessness. Enter sins of omission. Let's talk about it. Now, first things first, we first touched on sins of omission in End Times 300, an intro to lawlessness part 1, which was posted on July 1st, 2024. In that podcast, you learned that Lawlessness is the primary driver of iniquity and all sin. Not only this, but we classified all sin into two categories. Enter sins of commission and sins of omission. The former are sins you commit, and the latter are sins when you fail to commit. To wit, your failure to commit to doing the Father's will. Now, here lies the danger of distraction as it pertains to your election. Vis-a-vis, distractions are primary drivers of sins of omission. For as you are distracted, you are ignorant to the fact that you are failing to fulfill the requirements upon your election. Here again, this is why the word of truth is revealing all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. All things do not edify. As I say, that which is working against your election is not expedient, and it will not edify. Ergo, we have another reason to guard ourselves from the great danger of distractions. Let me tell you something. The one who is distracted will never be elected, for the requirements they omitted are sins that came to light because they were never committed. When the truth is very hard to find. Now, the third and final reason why our election into everlasting life is so difficult is the most critical reason and the objective of this mini series. Vis-a-vis, the enemy has a legion of false prophets and false believers who are attacking the word of truth daily. To wit, the same way our profession is to defend the word, these villains and thieves have been employed to attack the word. And in doing so, they are deceiving many into taking three destructive actions. First and foremost, they are inciting many to strive with Elohim by wrestling with his word. And although none of them realize that they are wrestling with the truth, they are the ones who have made themselves blind, and thus they are without excuse. Now, this brings us to destructive action number 2, vis-a-vis the constant disparagement of the word of Elohim opens the door for the masses to throw away the scriptures they don't want to adhere to. And we have analyzed this matter in prior podcasts. That said, the key takeaway is sure, and I will offer it as a revelation. Consider this, my friends, and don't forget. False believers have no intention of guarding the word of truth. Ergo, they are more than willing to conspire with Satan to deceive themselves and others into throwing away the scriptures they don't want to follow. And despite their phony claims and arguments, this ultimately is the genesis of their desecration of divine scripture. Now, this brings us to the third destructive action we should analyze. Vis-a-vis, many will see the chaos and confusion caused by false prophets and false believers, and they will lose confidence in the spiritual process. Here lies the problem. To wit, many of these individuals have been called, and yet they are struggling to be chosen because the enemy has created an environment where the truth is very hard to find. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, in a world filled with surplus information, the truth is harder to find in this day than ever before. Now, that said, I would yet encourage you to take courage and have no fear, for there is a reason why Yahuwah called me to launch this ministry, and there is a reason why you are here. As I say, you are here to fulfill all the requirements upon your election, and thus you, my friends, are the most critical players in the assault against the word of truth, for you are the only ones who are still in play. And if you want to stay in play, I encourage you to stay with me if you're with me, for we have a long way to go to uncover the whole truth about this controversy. And we all have a long road to travel to make our calling and election sure. Now, here is the final word. The ones who stay upon their flaws will never be chosen, though they were called. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, there is a very easy way to tell the called from the chosen in these last days. Vis-a-vis, those who are chosen are overcomers. We go into spiritual battle, and by the power of the Spirit, we will always win. And yet, those who were called can never be victorious, for they failed to win the first battle. They never reigned over sin. Heretofore, I recommend commit yourself to the path to be chosen and fulfill every requirement upon your election. And when the messengers come to gather the wheat, you will be a perfect selection. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, The Assault Against the Word of Truth, Part 8. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 6:30, Your Victory Over Disregard. I will post this podcast on Monday, March 16th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim, continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.